Okay, class. This is going to be a little bit different because I wasn't planning on doing it just this way. But since this is where we are, then we're going to go ahead with this. Hopefully, you will find this helpful as I try to put together something that will make sense to you. All right. I miss seeing your faces. Hope you're well. Um, but with this situation with Moodle down and everything, I want to do the best I can to highlight things that I think are going to be really important for you. So here we go. So here's the outline. This is going to be a shorter night because there's not going to be any give and take, and I just want to share the highlights that come to my mind as we go through this. Um, and so I want to just start with prayer, as we always do, and just pray that God will guide us through our time. So, Father, I pray that you will help us to get all we can out of this presentation, that it will make sense, be clear, helpful, and that despite not being able to get together to see one another and chat and ask questions, it will still be very helpful. So I just want to commit the next hour or so into your hands. Amen. So you read the article from Michael Whitmer about the fall happened. It talks about this is an event that took place in time. It really happened, and it's had an effect on anything and everything. So it affects who we are, how we think. It undermines research that we do. It undermines science. It undermines our relationships. The basic concept of the fall is that we are not the people that we should be. We are not living in the world that God intended us to live in. And so we're stuck in this situation where, although we're made in God's image and we look around at the world that he made, which is so great, there are still distortions and problems with it. It's not the world that he wanted us to enjoy. And because of this event that happened at the one time, we have inherited this sin nature. And you can see it in your own kids. If you have kids, it doesn't take them very long to learn how to say no. And you give them a boundary and they will push it. And I've sometimes, I remember with one of my kids, I didn't want him to touch the stereo, don't touch it. And so he'd just go up with just like one finger to just literally just touch it. Would this be okay? Where's the line? And always pushing at the boundaries. So this is the reality. And it's part of why I am persuaded that the Christian worldview makes so much sense. When I look at the world around me, in fact, what I do see is lots of good people doing great things, lots of things that work well. I love my iPhone. I love the technology that God has given me through science and through, the thinking of scientists and engineers. I think it's wonderful. And yet, you know what? I don't work the way I should. The phone doesn't work the way I should. Moodle doesn't work the way it should. We always encounter these problems where things don't do what we think they should do. And so as I look at the world around me, I realize that despite all the good, despite all the beauty, it's not what it could be. It's not what it should be. And across the entire planet, throughout history, all cultures have had this sense that we are not what we could be. There's a right and a wrong, and then we don't live up to it. We don't even meet our own standards of good and bad and right and wrong. All right, just checking text messages to see if any of you are still texting me to find out what's happening. Okay, so that's the fall. The effects of the fall continue forever, and I just paused for a second to close the door, so hopefully we don't lose anything when I do have to pause it and start pick up where I left off. But it's an event that happened, but its impact continues on throughout time. And so it was a past event, but it has everlasting consequences. Okay, we'll leave that. The key application of that is that as we do research, as we study, we don't always get the information correct. We don't interpret it correctly. We encounter problems. You can see this happening right now around us with the pandemic that we're dealing with, getting the correct information about it, interpreting that information correctly, what kinds of drugs are helpful, what kinds of drugs are not helpful. Should we wear a mask? Should we not wear a mask? How does this work? And so it's just a complicated situation, and part of that is because of the fall. All right, so just quickly reviewing some of the big ideas. We'll do a literature review. We're going to look at scales and measurement, and then we'll do a preview of Unit 3. So moving forward. Okay, APA manual, some of the key chapters. And you know what? I think those numbers are based on the 6th edition now that I think about it. And what I want to call your attention to is the, it's not going to be chapter 3. Chapter 4, writing and grammar. That's really important stuff. And then the in-text citations, which is chapter 8. So those numbers have changed. So instead of 3 and 6, 4 and 8 in the new edition. Good places for a paperclip, because we're always looking at how well you write, how well you say what you say, and are you crediting your sources appropriately. So as we begin our research, as beginning researchers, you are not in a position to be able to speak with authority about something you have done because you haven't done the research yet. So we always begin by building on what others have done, and that means finding out what they've done and crediting those sources appropriately. And learning how to do that, that's a trick. We've already talked about Word and the importance of using that template to get set up so that your formatting is done properly. That's just do it that way and save everybody some grief. I don't want to talk to you about the format. I really want to talk about the substance. But the format is given. It's just, that's the boundaries. PowerPoint, mention that in your syllabus, 6x6 guideline. We've talked about that. Hope you set up your Gmail forwarding so that you never miss a Cornerstone email. We've talked about the Miller Summon tool, which is built into Moodle. You just go right there, and any topic you want, you can find them. And again, we're only looking for peer-reviewed sources. And the acronym is CRAP, and that's the way it comes out with a double A. Currency, in other words, it's fairly new, last 3-5 years or so. Relevance, it's clearly on track with your topic. It doesn't just have a common word, but it really is relevant to what you're talking about. The source you use has some authority. It's a published author, recognized university, those kinds of things. The information is accurate, so it's up to date, but it's also well done. It's reliable. You can trust it, and the material you're using clearly fits in for the purpose that you have. So it may be relevant in that it's the same topic, but is it academic? Is it designed for an adult audience in the sense of academia, or is it something that's really, it's fine, it's true, it's current, but it's really geared to middle school, for example? That would be one of the purposes we would look at. And then really a big thing is plagiarism versus paraphrasing. And so the absolute critical point is that you want to be putting as much as you can into your own words. You want to be paraphrasing your ideas. But just because it's your wording does not mean you get away without citing it. If you got the idea, you got the information, the data, whatever it is, from another source, you must cite that source. And don't quote it. I really don't want to see lots of quotes. If it's a quote, it better be really something cool. Something like, wow, really? They said that? In other words, shocking because you can't believe they said it. Or very clever. It was so well worded. But just because they wrote a sentence that's kind of nicely done, it's not worth quoting. And often you can take the sentence from one of your sources and condense it down to half the size, and you make the point, but you cite the source. Your in-text citations always will have author and date. Always, always author and date. And the date always follows immediately after the author. Sometimes both the author and the date are within the parentheses. Sometimes you mention the author as part of your sentence, and right after their name you put the date in parentheses. And you can also include the page number. You have to include the page number if it's a direct quote, and that can go with the date or it can go at the end of the sentence if you wish. So it's all explained in your manual. Go to your manual. You'll see how to cite properly, but that's a key thing. Keep your originality index. When you submit to the Dropbox, you will get an originality score. You want to see that, less than 15% non-original. It should be 90% your ideas, if possible. Okay. What is a literature review? So this is your big project for this course, is the literature review. And I'm going to move my screen here for a second just so you can see that. I'm moving it on mine. Hopefully it'll move on yours where I'm speaking. What is a literature review? So this is the big project of your course, is doing a literature review. It's part of every major research project. The idea is that you don't do research in a vacuum. You are building on what other people have done. And so you're not, shooting an arrow into the air and hoping it lands somewhere valuable. You're building on what others have done, and you're extending knowledge that one next step beyond what others have done. So the format can vary by the subject matter. The format's not the most critical part of it. But a literature review, in your case, is going to be a standalone project. It's not going to be part of a bigger work, but typically it's part of a research study. It's one chapter in a dissertation, for example. But it can just be, all right, what are people saying about this? It's a way of gathering up all the information to find out, where are the holes? What do we know so far about this subject? And sometimes that's just a good project in and of itself. It's not really a primary research, but it's a good study. It's a good project. And we want to let people know that this is the state of affairs in this particular area. And you're not just cutting and pasting, that kind of thing. Never cut and paste unless that's that brilliant, great quote, one or two in a paper maybe. But rather you're analyzing the information that you find out there. You're pulling from all the known authorities, the really recognized people, the well-established studies, the ones that everybody else refers to because they're so groundbreaking. So you want to make sure you have all the really significant researchers in your review, that you've looked at their work, and then you're going to analyze, what do we know, what do we don't know. And so you're going to summarize the information, you're going to group it, organize it, classify it, you're going to compare these studies. That you may have comments like, this study only looked at boys, this study looked at boys and girls, this study only looked at a certain age group or a certain cultural group. And so you're looking at all the different research that's out there, and you're assessing it as you go, and you're commenting on it. And that's your literature review. Okay, so that is your project for this course. That's the big part of it. And this is going to help you on every single research paper you do. Okay, create an outline. When you read your first ever article, there's going to be subheadings. That's the beauty of APA. You get to use these subheadings. And those subheadings will give you good outline ideas. And so I've mentioned my dissertation on bullying. And there's always stuff about the bully. And so that's a topic. There's material about the upbringing, the family life of the bully. There are issues on gender, so there's another heading. So what do we say about boys versus girls? There's material on victims. There's material on bystanders. There's material on the location for bullying. So all of those things become headings in my outline. And I may start with location, or I may get to location later. I can move that outline around however I wish. But as you read your articles, you realize, oh, this is a major topic. Everybody talks about, the victim, or everybody talks about boys versus girls, or whatever it is. So you create your outline, and then as you're going through each paper, I take all of my notes on the article before I leave that article. Okay, so if I'm in this article, I'm reading it, I am getting ideas. Oh, that's a really good point. That goes under location. This is a good point. It goes under gender. And I start typing in my thoughts there. I put it in my own words, and I always cite it when I put it into the outline. Okay, so I know where I got the information. So I cite everything. If I got it from that article, I cite it when I put it into my outline. and I write it up as paragraph form. Now, I may have 2 or 3 sentences, some of which are my sentences, my thoughts about it, so I don't need to cite that. But the key point that I got from the article, I'm citing it. And then as I'm writing my paper and going through all the material in this outline, which expands over time with, you're basically, with your outline, you're adding paragraphs. And that's how my notes are. It's usually a paragraph, 2 or 3 sentences. What did I find out about boys versus girls in this article? And I'm jotting that down and I'm citing that source. And then basically the paper writes itself. And now you may end up moving the outline around, changing the order, cut, paste, that's fine. But that just helps you to synthesize all this material, because you may have material from 20 different sources. Everybody's texting me tonight, not sure why. Turn that off. You may have material from 20 different sources, and in order to organize that into something that is uniquely yours, you create the outline. And so then when you go to your next article and you find another comment about, victims or, whatever the topic you're researching is, as you get to those subtopics, you can put it into your outline, type it up, and then, your paper is being created through the note-taking process. Then when it comes to write your paper, you realize, oh, this paragraph really belongs later. This one needs to transition smoothly to the next one. But basically, the rough draft of the paper is there. You have all of this material with headings. And sometimes you realize, you know what? I'm not going to have a separate heading for boys and for girls. I'm just going to call it gender. So you merge a couple, or you realize, boy, I've got 3 pages on victims. I need to break that down into a couple of subtopics, whatever. All right. So the outline gives you your major subtopics. It provides a structure for the review. It makes organizing it so much simpler because you can see everything in this page or 2 is related to this topic. And you can cut and paste an entire couple of pages if you want and say, oh, this belongs later, this belongs earlier, because you're making a unique study. It's unique to you. Nobody's ever done it exactly the way you have and has your particular purpose in mind. So can't stress enough making the outline, going through the article, getting all of your notes out of that article so that you don't have to go back to that article ever again, hopefully, okay? Rather than finding notes in 20 different articles about this subheading. Get everything from the article, but put it into your paper according to the subheadings of your outline, and then you've already started on your organizing. Half the battle is done. So huge. Every topic in your outline should have 1 or more articles, typically more than 1, unless it's a topic that only one person happened to touch on, then that could be. But as you look at literature reviews, if you look at your articles, you'll see that they're always referring to multiple different authors. They're back and forth and back and forth. Sometimes they refer to the same author 2 or 3 times in a paper at different places because that researcher has studied that topic and has addressed it. But in any given page, you may have 5, 6, 7, 8 different citations from different people. That shows that you've read widely, you're gathering the information from far and you're putting it together in just this unique package. All right. It works better if we're live, so whatever. Okay, there we go. So in your literature review, there's going to be an introduction, there's going to be a body, there's going to be a conclusion. Your introduction is telling us, what are you studying? What's the general topic? What's the current trends? What do people think about this? What's happening here? Are there conflicts in the theory? Some people think this and some people think that. Some people have surveyed, some people have observed, some people have tested. What methods have been used? What kinds of evidence has been gathered? So I'm moving my screen again here out of the way. What kinds of things are people saying? So what are the general sort of conclusions? And whether there's more research that has to be done. So why are you doing this? Why are you looking at it? What's your, how did you decide what things to include? I've only looked at articles in the last 2 years because there were thousands in the last 5 years, or I've gone back 10 years because there's only a handful of articles being written on this subject. So why did you choose the articles? that you looked at, or you zeroed in on only those that have to do with companies of such and such a size or whatever. Explain what you're doing, why you're doing it. How have you organized the review? What are the key ideas? You've organized it around, people, places, and things. You've organized it around, the impact of marketing on the client response to the marketing, whatever. And if there's anything that you didn't include in the literature review, we didn't look at anything older than this because there was so much, or we didn't look at studies that had only, fewer than 100 participants, or those kinds of things. Just explaining, tell us what's in this literature review. The introduction gives us an introduction to what you're doing, why you're doing it, what it's going to look like. Give me the summary there. And then if you have a thesis statement, this would be typical particularly in a long project, but that's usually one of your final paragraphs is what is your conclusion? What do you say? This feature, one of you is doing the influencers, and so maybe you concluded from all the literature you've read that influencers clearly can make a difference to the bottom line in very positive ways, or maybe mixed ways, or, again, a summary statement of what you found is good. All right, then the body, then all of your research studies are grouped appropriately with your headings using your outline. We've already mentioned that. You are going to summarize your really significant works, talk about, why they're very important, how other people have referred to them. And you're always going to start with the heart of the matter. You start with the most specific, and then you broaden out. So I looked at bullying in schools was the primary focus. My goal was Christian schools, but as I went through, I found, well, then there's also this study over here in an Israeli kibbutz. And there's also been studies of bullying in the workplace, but those are further out, okay? Because I really want to focus on K-12 here in the United States. So that's where I start. Start with the heart of your study. And then as you go along, you can bring in some of these other ones that are not directly related, but they're connected. And so that's fine. But you start at the center and you move out to these sort of additional ones that are not so important later. Everything is organized by your themes around those headings. And, you do have to use transition sentences, okay, or help the reader move from the last paragraph to the next one. So, however, despite this, we also notice that this, particularly if that's contrasting with something you've already said. So make sure that as you read it, that it doesn't sort of jump to a new topic with no connection, or a new paragraph has no connection to the previous one. Everything needs to move smoothly, and you can just cut and paste and move it around until it really works logically through. Again, your outline helps you do that, but even within those subheadings, everything has to move smoothly through, and so wording the sentences a little bit differently to make sure they connect. Words like however, therefore, because of this, or as a result of that, those kinds of things show the reader how what you're talking about now is connected to what came before. All right. And then your conclusion, key ideas, key research, data that you've uncovered that was really significant. What have you found? Were there problems with the methodology that, surveys are no good because people give you the answers that they think you want, or observing situations it's no good because people change their behavior when they know they're being observed, or whatever. So you talk about any problems with the various methodologies that were used in the research, any gaps. So what do we not know? Like, yeah, we've all looked at, males and females in the workplace, but have we looked at transgender in the workplace, for example? Have we looked at, we've looked at blacks and whites, but what about Hispanics? And so what's the gaps? What are we missing? What has nobody looked at? And those are great subjects for new research. It's the things that nobody else has looked at. And so that's where I found my my gold mine was bullying in Christian schools. Nobody looked at that. They looked at bullying, they looked at Christian schools, but nobody looked at those two together. So that gave me an in. Inconsistencies, and so the theory says this, but what we find is that, or half the studies found this, but the other half found that. So there's clearly some conflict between what the researchers are telling us. It's not consistent. We've got to look at this more carefully, and maybe that leads to a study specifically on that area where they are conflicting. Why are they conflicting? Do they ask a different group of people, or they use a different methodology, or what? Why is this coming out with a conflict? Because the whole point of good research is it should be replicable. Whatever you study, I should be able to do that same study and come up with the same information, the same data, and therefore similar conclusions. Or they have the data, but they're coming up with different conclusions. Why is that? Because of biases or whatever. So explaining that all is part of your conclusion. What are we going to look at next? So what are possibilities that nobody's explored that maybe, this would be the next thing to do. This would be the next method to use. Maybe we've looked at the topic, but we haven't done it this way. Okay, and then how does this fit in with the rest of the world, whether, a K-12 education, if it's bullying or if it's marketing, why is this important? Okay, so that's your literature review. That's the big project. This will get you into graduate level writing and research, and this is how we're going to introduce this to you. So leave that. We'll go on to the next area I want to talk about, nature and role of data. Of course, you can pause this anytime you want, so I'm just going to keep blabbering away here. If it gets to information overload, just give it a pause. This would be a good place for a break, but I'm on a roll, so we're going to continue. All right, so data is just the bits and pieces of information, okay? All the little bits of information that we get from a study, whether it's a survey or an experiment or observations, all the numbers, the quantity of people, the quantity of behaviors, the quantity of widgets, the averages, the means, all of this kind of stuff. All this information we gather to make some conclusions about the world out there. Data are transient. Well, the reason they're transient is because it's always changing, because more people are born, they die, new events happen, and so it's constantly in flux. So that's why we're always looking for current information. If you use data that's 5, 10, 15 years old, there's no way of knowing whether it's still true because people change, the world changes. So data has to be fairly current to be really useful. It can be primary or secondary. Primary, you found it yourself. You did the observations, you did the survey, you did the measuring. Then it's primary data. But if you get it from somebody else, then it's secondary. And this is, again, where I got stuck in my study. There were so many hurdles to get over for me to study bullying on my own. I had to turn it over to a school and say, hey, would you do this survey? And so they did. And then since they did the survey, they took the risk of, damaging children in conducting the survey or whatever. I don't think there was any risk, but anyway, couldn't do it myself. They then shared the data with me, and so to me, it's secondary data. I did not do the survey myself, but they gave me all the data. They actually gave me the surveys, and I entered all the numbers and created the data. So that's secondary. Primary, you find it yourself through your observations, your measurements, your experiments. Secondary, someone else did that, but gave you the information. And so still useful, still, you do stuff with that information that maybe they didn't. So it doesn't mean that primary or secondary is better or worse. It's just we want to know, how did you come by this information? And then once you have the data, you have to interpret it. And you have to communicate it to others. And there's problems with both of those. We can see the same information and draw different conclusions. We can have the same conclusion, but not communicated effectively. Some of these are really simple, like, do you want to communicate it in a table with a lot of different numbers, so you've got lots of specific information, you can see exactly what the numbers are, but you don't see the patterns very well. Or you can communicate with a graph, or a line graph that shows you trends over time, or a circle graph that shows you the component bits and pieces of something larger. All of those speak very quickly and easily to show you some relationships, but you lose some of the specificity that you find in a table. And so just making the decision about whether you're going to have a graph or a table is really important. Sometimes you do both, because of what you're trying to accomplish with it. Okay, so how we interpret it, that's based on some of our biases, what we're thinking we're going to see. Sometimes we can look at the same information and come up with different interpretations of that information. So you have to be careful. Just because you have the data doesn't mean that your conclusions are fully accurate. All right, moving along. Measurement. So once we get our data, we do stuff with it. We measure. We have all kinds of ways of measuring things. Sometimes we have what we call substantial measurements. That's like feet, inches, miles, pounds, ounces, temperature, the physical substances. So we have very clear physical tools that we use to measure. But then we also measure insubstantial items like concepts, ideas, opinions, feelings, values. What drives people, what motivates people. We don't have a physical instrument, so we use surveys usually, or we interview people and we get them to talk about this. But you still get measurements out of this when you're all done. They're just different kinds. And we take those measurements, and from all of that data, as we measure it, we find averages and means and significant differences, all of these things. We come to some new understanding because of the measurements that we've gained from the data. We get averages, norms. We can say whether, wow, that's really far out there, or this is really typical. This is what we would expect. And we have terms like goodness of fit. Does all this data fit into a nice straight line, or do we have outliers? We have things that just don't seem to fit at all what we would expect. We know, for example, that in a large population, height is randomly distributed. There will be very few super tall people, very few super short people. Most people will be right in the middle, what we call average height. And so then you'll have a certain number that'll be above average, a certain number that'll be below average. We know exactly what that should look like. It should form a bell curve, right? And so we know that. So we have some mathematical tools that enable us to measure, draw some conclusions. And if we find that, boy, the height of these students is exceptionally tall, they're outliers, they don't seem to fit the normal curve, what's going on? Well, if you measured students coming out after basketball practice, yes, that would explain why the heights don't fit what we would expect for the average cornerstone student, for example. All right? So lots of measuring that goes on, lots of different ways. There are a number of different scales of measurement, okay? So this is important because depending on the kind of scale you use, it determines the kinds of measurements you can make, or the kinds of statistical tests that you can perform to be more accurate, okay? So scales tell us how we can organize data, and then the statistical procedures that we can perform on that data to draw certain conclusions. And I'm just going to go through these scales with you fairly quickly. It's important that you understand these distinctions. All right. So nominal scale. Nominal scales, nominal for name. We just name them. All right. Measures data by a name or category. So boys and girls. Okay. They're just different. There's just two different groups. Red, blue, yellow. You can't average those together, right? They just are different. North of Main Street, south of Main Street. You can find the mode which is the thing that comes up the most often. So here we've got, in this table here, we have a eating and a religion cross-tabulation. So we have meat eaters, and we can count how many meat eaters have no religion, how many are Christian, and what the total is. And we can say what our expected count was if everything was just average. We have our vegetarians, and then down at the bottom we have the total of both, and does it match? Okay, they're just categories. Small, medium, large. Okay, well, small is smaller than medium, but and you know what? I shouldn't use small, medium, large because that's a different kind. That's ordinal. Red, blue, yellow. Okay, red, blue, yellow. You can't say that yellow is more than red, or you can't average them. You can count up how many reds you had. So if you're selling t-shirts, which color sells the most? But you can't say, oh, what's the average color of these t-shirts that were sold? Okay, there's no average of them. You can find the mode, you can find the percentage, and there's a chi-square test to see, how much more popular is this color than that color. You can make some comparisons that way. That's a nominal scale. It's the lowest level. It's the simplest, and you can't do a lot with it. But there are times when it's important to know. All right, ordinal. You can do a little bit more with ordinal. Ordinal is rank ordered data. Okay, so think in terms of elementary, high school, college, small, medium, large. So we know that although let's take small, medium, large, we don't know the difference in weight or size precisely with a small versus a medium versus a large. They're kind of generic terms. We can't do a lot of math with it because we just don't know exactly how they're connected. But we do know that medium is bigger than small and large is bigger than medium. Okay? So like a horse race, first place, second place, third place. Well, how much faster is first place than second place? Well, it could be different in every race. Okay, so we just know it's first, and then second and third. So it's ordered. First is the one that crossed the finish line the first, and third came across third. We know that much, but beyond that we don't know a lot. Okay, we can find the median. That's the middle number with half or higher, half or lower. So you could say that the median could be. We often use that with housing prices, which half the houses were more than this price, half were less than this price. Percentile rank, the top 10%, the bottom 10%, everything in between. So now we can categorize them in an order because they are ordinal. We know that this is bigger, this is bigger, this is bigger as we go up. Okay? And there is a test, Spearman's rank order correlation, and it'll help us to see as this thing changes, how does the other one change? And so you get these patterns here of the graph. Don't worry about it beyond that. Key thing is ordinal gives us a relationship between them where one is clearly bigger, smaller, heavier, whatever, than the other. Okay? So as opposed to red, yellow, blue. You can't say one is better, bigger. You can't measure those, and you can't average those. All right? All right, next one. Interval data. So, as we said before, you can't really say how much difference there is between small, medium, large, or first, second, third place, because they could be different. The difference between the first place finisher in a race and the second might be very small, but second to third could be, much bigger. So there's not any consistent interval between them. There isn't a consistent number of inches between a large and a medium and a small, and an extra large and an extra small. They're different, but it's not a consistent measurement. So an interval measurement has an equal number of points between them. So 5, 10, 15, 20, everything is measured out and has a consistent gap. So the example given often is temperature or a tape measure. Okay. Temperature is better because it's an arbitrary zero. There's not a real zero. Every point on the measurement is equal. So if it goes up 1 degree in temperature from 50 to 51 degrees, that's exactly the same change as 51 to 52. All right, same amount of additional heat. But zero, if it's Fahrenheit, was established by a man named Fahrenheit who thought that was as cold as it would ever get and as coldest as possible, and so he made that zero. And Celsius was designed by the French during the Napoleonic years. It is the freezing point of water, and then 100 degrees is the boiling point of water. They just want to have nice, even numbers. But again, those are arbitrary zeros. We can see the gap between them is exactly the same, but there's no clear 0 point to start, okay? We can find means or averages. We can find standard deviation. We can find a Pearson correlation using this. So more statistical tests that we can do with an interval measurement than with a nominal or ordinal. All right, so we've got ratio measurements. Sorry, this is the one that we can do the most with, okay? They're equally measured units, so 1, 2, 3, 4, everything is even when you move from the first to the second to the third. There is an absolute 0 point, a total absence of the quality. So measuring tape, if you don't have any distance at all, that's 0. If there's no weight at all, that's 0. Okay? So then, if you gain 5 pounds from 0, that's exactly the same as going from 5 pounds to 10 pounds, okay? Everything is consistent and there's a genuine 0. So then we can say that 10 pounds is exactly twice as many as 5 pounds. But with Celsius, we can't say that 10 degrees is twice as warm as 5 degrees because there's no genuine 0. You'd have to use the Kelvin measuring system that goes down to absolute 0. Okay, so with an absolute 0, you can come up with different comparisons than you can when there isn't an absolute one. So with ratio, you can have multiples. This is 3 times as big, 5 times as big, all kinds of things you can do. Fractional comparisons, half, 1/3 of. And you can do all the interval tests that we had before, plus t-tests, f-tests, correlations, regressions, all kinds of measurement tools. So ratio gives you the most possibility for statistical testing, okay? We're not going to go further into that. You don't need to worry about it, but you will see things like t-tests, very, very common as we compare different things. If there's time in this course, we'll look at it a little bit more detail later on, simply because you're going to come across it in your research. You may have already seen this in the articles that you've read. You get to these tables and they show you the difference between this number and that number. And is it significant? Is it enough to say, oh, this did not happen by chance? All right. So remember those 4 different types of scales. Nominal, the simplest ones, just names. Red, yellow, blue. Ordinal, first, second, third. Interval, 5, 10, 15, all equal numbers, and then ratio goes from 0 to 5, 10, 15. All right? Okay. A couple more concepts as we wrap up. Validity. Validity asks the question, does this measure what we think it does? All right? People say that they prefer McDonald's to Wendy's, therefore McDonald's burgers are better. Well, did we really measure the burger, or did we measure public opinion about the restaurants? And so is this getting somebody's opinion of the restaurant, is that a valid measure of the quality of the burger? No, it's not valid. Okay? That's not an automatic connection. Reliability has to do with whether the measurements are consistent from one time to the next. So maybe we survey people. I'm going to move that off there over to here. on Monday, and we get one set of data, and we measure them again on Tuesday, and it comes up with the same information. Sure enough, people still like McDonald's better. And then Wednesday and Thursday, we keep getting the same information, and we think, we've got really good, accurate results. Well, they're reliable results because every time you run the experiment, you get the same data, but they're not necessarily accurate if they're not valid, if it's not really telling you what you thought it was telling you. So in order to have good information from research, it has to be valid and reliable. If every day that you take a test, you get a different score, then it's not very reliable. If every day you get different opinions in the surveys, then it's not reliable. It may be a good survey, maybe really measuring what you're after, but the way you're doing it, the way you're handing that survey out, or something about the way you're doing it, you're not getting consistent results. And good research should give you the same data on Monday as you get on Sunday, and on Tuesday the same as on Monday, all the way through. Okay? So validity, reliability, both really important concepts in research. All right, where are we going next? Unit 3. We're able to see if I just talk, then we get through faster. Where are we headed? Okay, this coming week, Chapter 6, Descriptive Research. I've highlighted the page numbers that I think that are really important, so stuff to underline there to think about. And there's 170 to 185. There's 15 pages there. It's all important stuff. So pay attention to all of it. Read through it all. But those are really key ideas. Chapter 7, 192 to 206, 211 to 214. Those are really important concepts in there. And then DISC assessment. You may have heard of this before, DISC. I love the DISC test. The DISC is a personality inventory. It is not statistically proven to be a valid psychological test. There aren't any out there. Myers-Briggs is the best known, but it's not really any more valid than the others. But it is a useful and simple tool and a framework, a way of kind of getting good discussion started, some ideas about people that may help you in working with other people. It's such an important tool in terms of understanding yourself and understanding other people that we wanted to put it into the course or into the program early on. And so we put it into research methods. It doesn't have a lot to do with research methods, in all honesty, but it does have a lot to do with the business world, because in the business world, you work with people. You're going to be hiring people. You're going to be firing people. You have bosses, you have employees, you have colleagues. You've got people above, below, and around you. You have customers. And so learning how to work with other people, understanding yourself, these are important skills. And this is one tool that will help you to do it, okay? And so I have done this with myself, done it with our whole family. I know how my kids shape up on it. I don't pigeonhole them into one particular category necessarily, but it does help me to understand, oh yes, they are going to want this kind of information. That's kind of the way they're wired. They're going to be looking for this, or they're not going to enjoy this because of, so for me, this was a helpful tool in understanding myself and understanding people around me. And as a boss, it was one of the ways that I was able to describe me and my priorities and how I'm wired to make it easier for my subordinates to relate to me and to understand, okay, this is probably the way he's going to want that. And it just made it easier for them to make a case for me, present an idea, to understand the decision-making process once they understood the way I'm wired. I think that's a really good way of working with people, is letting them know these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses. So be aware of that, and it makes it easier when your boss kind of lets you in on the secret, if you will, and you don't have to second guess, what kind of boss is this? Well, I'll tell you what kind of boss I am. I'm this kind of boss. So there you have an assessment to take for yourself. There's a forum where you'll get a chance to talk about this and some articles to read. Continue on. You should have 10 articles now under your belt with your topical reference list, and you're going to want to have 15 to 20 for your literature review at the end of the course. So keep gathering notes. This is something you work on continually. Just keep reading another article. Make that a goal every week. I'm going to read 2 more articles. I'm going to take notes. I'm going to put it into my outline, and you'll find that putting that final paper together is not that big a deal if you just work on it bit by bit. And hopefully it's something you're interested in, so it's not like a chore. It's like, oh, this is really cool stuff. Like, wow, look what I read today. Okay, so I hope that works for you. We're just under an hour, and I think I've covered everything that's really critical that I feel you're going to need. And again, I apologize on behalf of the university. I don't know what's happened. It's never happened to me before like this, that we were completely down, unable to get onto Moodle. But I'm sure they'll have it sorted out within a day or so. Get a hold of me by email or phone if you need, whatever. I'm always here to help out, and I'll be connecting with you on the forum as well. Automatic extension, if you haven't done your quiz and you can't get in to do it, then that's not your fault. You're supposed to have until Monday night, and if you can't get into Moodle, then that's understandable. So always an extension for extenuating circumstances outside of your control completely. All right. God bless, and I will see you next week.